Welcome to Sanity, a podcast by the New York Sun. My name is A.R. Hoffman, and every week, along with my co-host, Rebecca Sugar, we try to make sense out of the nonsense and bring a little bit of sanity to your week. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Ari. So the quote of the week this week is from Hillary Clinton, who back in 2019 was on David Plouffe's, the former Obama advisor's podcast, and she was talking about what she anticipated.
Also Kamala Harris's campaign chair.
Right. I don't think he wants to be known for that.
They edited it out of the resume.
Hillary was talking about Senator Clinton, Secretary Clinton, was talking about what she anticipated would be Russian interference in the 2020 elections, and she was referring back to 2016, where she said, of course, that Donald Trump was favored by the Russians. So I wanted to read to you what she said during this podcast. I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who is currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians. They have a bunch of sites and bots and other ways of supporting her so far, and that's assuming Jill Stein will give it up, which she might not, because she's also a Russian asset. Yeah, she's a Russian asset. I mean, totally. They know they can't win without a third-party candidate. So in this quote, she was directly calling Green Party candidate Jill Stein a Russian asset, but of course the other person she was referring to was Tulsi Gabbard, and that was confirmed by Clinton's aide shortly after this interview that she was indeed referring to Tulsi Gabbard. So I just thought that karma is so interesting that here we are with Tulsi Gabbard now pointing to the entire Obama administration as having made up this Russian collusion hoax, as the Trump administration has called it, and that it all started with the Clinton campaign's false Steele dossier. So full circle moment, and we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah. And okay, so we'll start off by talking about the really extraordinary press conference and then criminal referral to the Department of Justice of President Obama and his some of his advisors, I guess. Our other top story is going to be the developing crisis over aid to Gaza. We'll talk about the Alina Habba drama over the bridge in New Jersey. And then we'll have a little bit of a grab bag to end the show with some sunlight and sunburns. So I think, the place to start is to say this feels like a sort of new phase. We know that Trump is someone who does not remember slights or just not forget them.
Right. And talking about the wrong guy.
Yes, the memory of an elephant for offense. Driving elements, I think, of a large portion of his policy has been a sense of, if you want to be generous, rectifying what had been done before. If you want to be sort of a little bit more critical, revenge. But now, specifically going after his first predecessor in Barack Obama, and using the Director of National Intelligence to kind of make that case in public. I'm working on a story now. Could we see a special prosecutor? Could Trump have his own version of Jack Smith kind of
Matt
brought
Gaetz,
into?
maybe?
Right, exactly.
His dream job.
Here he's has some time. So it's obviously a big story. On our editorial call this morning, someone kept saying, "But isn't this so 10 years ago?" I mean, it feels like we're in a little bit of a Back to the Future moment between this and Jeffrey Epstein. But, obviously this is an issue that is close to the president's heart, a sense of being wronged, a sense of being sabotaged in his first term, I think animated his desire to come back for another term. We'll see. I mean, I think, obviously we saw the reverse. Just being investigated, let alone being charged, can really make your life miserable. And I think that's something that President Obama, certainly doesn't want on his plate. He called the accusations bizarre and false and totally denied them. So there's a lot to dive into, Rebecca, but what were some of your initial thoughts?
Well, I think I would have framed it differently in that, of course, there's this Trump v. Obama, Trump v. Deep State angle to the story, and it's true. But I think Tulsi Gabbard, when she delivered her remarks, was very clear that this was, she called it I don't remember her exact words, but a coup against
a treasonous conspiracy.
Right, but against the American people, not just Donald Trump. And I think of it that way, too, in the sense of, if you make up false information and you weaponize our intelligence community, first of all, you betray the American people right there, but you're also denying the people their choice for president and his policies by tangling him up in this false, accusation and having him have to defend himself. And they were very successful in interrupting Trump's first term in office. I mean, they achieved their goal in doing this, but it wasn't just Trump who was harmed, right? It was the American people who sent him to that office in order to accomplish certain things. And one could argue that he was unable to accomplish a lot of it because of this hoax. And so it's not just one man and his revenge. I think this is, and I don't even dislike the word revenge, I think this might be the revenge of the American people on a government that has little regard for them and their choices and their decisions.
Yeah. I guess, one thing to remember here is we've already had two special counsel investigators who've looked at this, right? There was Robert Mueller and then there was John Durham. Durham especially, was, had years and years and didn't find any evidence of criminal activity. So I worry that what's happening here is a little bit of reheating, the burrito for the third time in the microwave. I also don't think it's the job of the Director of National Intelligence to be making criminal accusations. I mean, and, Tulsi Gabbard did say, that's going to be up to the DOJ, but it's a pretty startling thing. And it seems like now this is going to be her major remit, whether that's a good use of the intelligence, capacity and time, I'm not so sure about that.
Did you find anything new in her comments yesterday?
Not really. I mean, I can't say I went through every jot and tittle of it, but I think we have a pretty clear sense of what happened during the 2016 election. I mean, do you? I mean, do you feel like there's more sort of to uncover? I mean, it was clear that that some of the kind of Steele dossier and all that, were fraudulent. It was clear there was interference. It was, proven that it wasn't coordinated. I mean, do you have sort of outstanding questions about that? Or
I think that what I heard yesterday didn't surprise me, but I think it might have been the first time that it was sort of proven with documents. That might be the difference. I mean, she didn't argue that there was no Russian interference in the election or any other election we've ever had, probably. The argument was more specific, that the charge was made that it was interference for the purposes of electing Donald Trump, which was simply untrue, as the opposite of the intelligence that the Obama team had been given. And that on December 8th, they were given that information, didn't like it, on December 9th convened and decided to rewrite it. Seems to me that was new. I didn't know that, or I would have imagined it, but I didn't see it, held up on a piece of paper. And so I can't imagine why we wouldn't investigate that and hold people to account for that, assuming that that's true. Yeah.
No, I mean, I believe sunlight is the best disinfectant. I think, though, that, and I understand the point of view from the Trump world is, I was investigated, I was charged. I hate to see us go down a path where every ex-president is charged with a crime. Not to mention that, the Supreme Court's immunity decision, is likely going to protect Obama from any criminal
Right. So let's
charges.
talk about the actual crime here, right? Because it seems to me that this word treason is being bandied about. The Article 3 definition of it doesn't seem to apply.
Yeah, we had an editorial on that. That's I guess where my hesitation comes is sort of, treason is a word that even sounds awful. Treason, it has,
right.
So there's certain,
sort of spy novel stuff.
Spy novel, cloak and dagger,
But what about lying under oath? Brennan and Clapper both seem to have done exactly that and paid no price for it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the conspiracy charge from a legal perspective is, but I mean, from what I saw yesterday, there was a very clear conspiracy with intent.
Yeah.
So,
and sort of, I guess the way you framed it, Rebecca, actually, in a way almost mirrors, the case against Trump for January 6th. Remember, what Trump was actually indicted for was depriving Americans of the right to vote, meaning depriving them of having their vote count and mattered, right? And a kind of a strange, unusual charge. But the core of it was sort of what you were saying, frustrating the democratic process, right? Or frustrating. So it
this
sounds...
feels like a slightly deeper attempt to do exactly that. Trump's sort of claims that that the election was stolen, or his telling people to peacefully march, you could interpret that way if you wanted to. This case feels like beyond interpretation. It feels like it's very plain to see in black and white that it happened, that they deliberately discarded intelligence that didn't serve their narrative and then actually created new intelligence that wasn't true and they knew wasn't true to do exactly what you're saying. And so I think of them as different things.
It was after the election, right? So it wouldn't have affected.
Right, because they didn't know that he would win. They never imagined it. And so once they realized that he did win, they thought, well, what's the next best thing to stopping him from being the president, stopping him from enacting all of his policies as president? So I just think this is pretty black and white. Mark Penn, who we had on the show a couple weeks ago, posted on Twitter today, he's no Republican, and he said this is just a clear case of a betrayal of the American people and of Donald Trump, but more importantly of the American people. Anyway, here we are. I don't think that Republicans and the MAGA base in particular, are going to stand for this without somebody being held accountable. And it's probably, I don't know what you think, I think it's probably going to be Brennan and Clapper.
Yeah, who they hate anyway. I think, I mean, it's a fascinating question, sort of, the sort of political dimensions of this, the legal dimensions, as we said, like how does this kind of come together? I mean, at this point, I might get into this a little bit later on the show, but there are now criminal referrals against Adam Schiff, Letitia James, Barack Obama. So how far do these go is a really kind of interesting question.
Yeah. I share your concern about what this will do to the country for sure, and precedent setting and all that, but it's so black and white. It feels to me different than searching for some crime. I mean, Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff sat on, I think it was Tucker Carlson, said, I, with my own eyes, have seen evidence that President Trump colluded with the Russians. So clearly he never saw that because it didn't exist. So what should a country do when you have your own government officials just lying to your face? What should we do about that? Yeah.
I mean, it's just such a sordid story, and a convoluted story.
And Hillary Clinton on tranquilizers and her health things. I mean,
right.
That felt thrown in there for good measure.
Feels like the equivalent of the PDOS. It's kind of like, tit for tat. To take a step back though, and I understand your desire for accountability, but we were talking a couple weeks ago about how the Trump administration has actually racked up several impressive substantive victories at the Supreme Court in foreign policy and elsewhere, and I just feel like since the Epstein thing, they're sort of totally sidetracked to this stuff that maybe there's huge demand for it out there. I don't think your average American wants to go through the 2016 election. I could be wrong.
I'm surprised that you feel this way.
From Epstein, obviously.
Meaning you don't feel that the actual offense here, as I've described it, is worthy of being.
I mean, John Durham investigate. I mean, there was no finding of criminal act.
So you're saying there's no finding in what Tulsi has brought forth of anything criminal?
It doesn't seem Does it seem criminal to you, or what would
Criminal
be the
to
crime?
falsify intelligence reports? Criminal to lie to Congress?
We could prosecute George Bush for claiming there was
Weapons
of mass
of
destruction. Right. I don't know. I mean, I think this question of how intelligence is presented, edited, for sure, great question. I don't know.
Really?
I mean,
okay, we don't agree. I think that this is huge. I think this is like weapons of mass destruction level lying and fraud, and should be dealt with.
I guess. I mean, the question is do they have the goods? I mean, like, Russia hacked the DNC. They didn't hack the RNC, right? That's like a fact. Like, I don't know. I mean, what kind of level of evidence would you need to kind of really bring a criminal case here?
I would have said yesterday, but you're saying not.
Well, you have to, you kind of have to find the crime and then sort of work backwards. If lying or misrepresenting was a crime, I don't know, everyone would be guilty of it. But I'm open to see what else is uncovered. I'm not, I just,
I don't even anticipate more being uncovered that's new. I thought this was enough in my mind, that you can point directly to the fabrication, with intent, I guess, of the fabrication of an intelligence report that just was made up to serve your narrative, to thwart the will of the people, seems to me to be something that needs to be punished so that it doesn't happen again.
Okay, we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see. Let's, sort of move on to what, to speak frankly, I think is a very difficult situation, and that is the status of Gaza. The latest, I think, as we record this on Thursday, is that chances for a hostage deal are looking pretty low. Steve Witkoff is meeting in Sardinia with some of the players. I do love Sardinia in July, but obviously this is a serious matter. And we're all starting to see some of the images that are coming out. I think as two people who are supportive of Israel and in this war supportive of Israel, I think there are moral and strategic questions here that have to be answered. I mean, is this working? Is a change of course needed? I just did some looking up, and according to some reporting, the latest demand of Hamas, and I think this is important context, is for 200 Palestinians serving life sentences for murder of Israelis, and 2,000 Palestinians detained after October 7th, meaning in Israel, responsible for October 7th in one way or another, in exchange for 10 live hostages.
Right, of the 20 that are still alive.
Right. So do you do that deal? And then, but if not, is Israel being strategic here about its own interests? Obviously the people who are starving, but also what comes next.
Yeah, I think it's also really interesting to me how the narrative sort of shifted just from genocide to genocide by starvation.
Yeah.
And it is clear that even the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, acknowledges that there are food shortages, and it's not to minimize that at all. It's just interesting how people sitting at home, the average person who doesn't think about Israel very much, which I think is most people, have watched this unfold and assessed it. And it's right when the pictures of emaciated children came out that, people started to react. And as you would if you see a picture like that, it's a terrible sight. But that's no way to assess a famine or a genocide. Those are emotional reactions, real ones, to a very sad sight. But they're not, anecdotes are not data, I think, as they say. So, two things can be true at the same time. There really is a food shortage problem. I think the GHF battle with the UN and their food distribution failures, quite frankly, is really interesting too, because there's such a political lens through which we have to look at this, right? There are 900 trucks of aid sitting in Gaza. The Israelis have let through, and the UN just won't distribute it. They make lots of excuses for why they don't, but they don't. And meanwhile, GHF has been distributing millions of meals daily. And Hamas sits in its tunnels eating grapes and, with all the food that they steal.
Yep.
And it does feel, it is true that on a political level, this is a push to discredit the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and its ability to distribute food so that the UN can recapture that market and Hamas can enrich itself off of the sale of that food and further immiserate the lives of the Gazans and the Palestinians who live there. And my only contention is it's not to say that Israel shouldn't have to, as you say, strategically shift course here and find some other way, because they are certainly losing the PR battle on this in a colossal way. But there's another side that is responsible for what is happening, and the minimum is that that people can do is to call them out for it as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really well-balanced approach. I mean, there is no genocide. That is a lie. I think part of it also is there've been these claims of famine since like October 8th, and so there is justified kind of resistance to it. I mean, I think you're starting to see even, sort of reputable Israeli analysts and observers start to say, okay, like this is something that is becoming a real problem in a multifactorial way, Rebecca, for the reasons you articulated. And it's kind of a devil's dilemma here. Like, if there weren't hostages, I think the argument would be Israel should just pull out and sort of like figure out who takes over. How do you still have hostages there? You can't do that. On the other hand, it kind of takes two to tango to end a war, as weird as it sounds. Yeah. And if Hamas refuses to agree to a deal or keeps changing the goalposts, you can't end it. Right. As you said, Hamas control of aid is a huge factor in their economic ability to sustain themselves. So it's bad. It's a bad situation. I do think, some strategic thinking about, it's a dumb phrase, but like the day after is important here, right? I mean, the IDF is not a government, it's an army. And to ask the IDF to sort of govern, I think is really put strain on the army, especially when it's losing, unfortunately, soldiers every day.
Yeah, that's right. They're also not a food distribution service.
They're not a food distribution service, right? So I agree with you. I think a lot of the humanitarian criticism of the GHF are the most bad faith. And they are distributing food. The question is kind of like the overall security situation, and it's obviously not under control.
Right. I think also it'd just be helpful if, I don't know who's in charge in that region really. Is it the IDF or is it the the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation? But somebody should just declare or enact a law or whatever needs to be done that if there are warehouses full of unused aid, if there are trucks lined up and the UN refuses to distribute them because they are legitimately afraid to do so or because they're using this as leverage. Either way, I think that the GHF should be empowered to go in and just take it and distribute it. Yeah. I mean, people need it. This isn't a game, right? And I just want to say also that there, what's also not helping are people on both sides who are using this and making statements and posting photos that are just trying to up the game on their side. In other words, there's a congressman in Florida, right? I forget his name, who said, let them starve away until the hostages come home. Awful. No. Don't. Okay. And then on the other side, you have photos of starving Palestinian children being held in the arms of a mother who's, 50 pounds overweight. So some of these are staged, not all,
and just
but
out of
some.
context, you don't know, especially in today's world of AI. I mean, I'm not saying it's all. I'm just saying, we all have to be savvy consumers of visual data now, right? In anything, not just this.
Right.
I mean,
exactly. But that, that goes back to my original point is how do people assess this, the average person? If you're not already on side A or B, and we all see things through our own lens.
I think hunger is something that cuts through. Yes. I think your average person gets that in a way. I think this is sort of the concern for Israel is that like most people are like, people shouldn't be hungry or like, that's a kind of, And, there's a reason why, aid organizations have used pictures of emaciated children to raise money for decades.
Right.
Not just here, in Africa,
Yes.
right? I mean,
Right.
there's something that it pulls
Right.
at the heartstrings.
I'm sure there are many Africans in many African countries who only wish that there was this much attention on their starving children. I just have to say, not that one matters more than the other, but it is interesting where people focus their attention.
Just, as someone who wants Israel to win, Israel to be safe, Israel to be successful, I think Israel should see this as a strategic and security challenge. And I just wish it and maybe it is, and maybe it's just insolvable and or it will get solved or whatever. I'm not in the cabinet meetings, but it's not great. It's not great. And if the thing is, just has to push on, and this is, that's one argument. But as you say, the messaging doesn't feel very clear to me. It's not clear when this ends. I think ultimately you need a ceasefire to get in food. I mean, that's the ultimate thing. But but a ceasefire at all costs is a win for Hamas. So.
Right. And look, might just be the consequence of these long protracted wars. Things happen and they take turns that you don't anticipate, and they're not always in your favor. And so it's an argument also to go back to the beginning of the war, when certain members of the Israeli cabinet at that time were arguing for, getting it done quickly and moving in faster. And maybe it just I
mean, we're coming on 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a long time. Okay. So our Make It Make Sense is a story I have to say, Rebecca, I found a little bit obscure when it first broke, or I didn't know really anything about this, and I've tried to, in my own reporting, educate myself. So let's start off with, this is about Alina Habba and the U.S. attorneys. So basically, a permanent United States attorney needs Senate confirmation.
They're appointed by the president, but need Senate confirmation.
Exactly. Habba and a lot of other prosecutors have been appointed on an interim basis, and that lasts 120 days. And after 120 days, there's a law in the books, I've looked it up myself, it does exist, that the federal judges in that area, in that district, can then decide whether that person stays on or not. It's a strange kind of idea, right? Because remember, the U.S. attorney is part of the executive branch. Obviously, judges are part of the judicial branch. And so, you have basically a judicial check on the president's ability to appoint a prosecutor.
I have a question about that before you proceed, because as I understood it, the attorney general, though, can appoint the interim is the interim attorney general for the state.
U.S. attorney, yeah.
Right, the U.S. attorney, sorry. And then after the 120 days, is it true that if she doesn't then appoint another interim, or if a permanent is not confirmed, then the judges can step in?
Yeah, well, this is kind of the cutting edge of the story, because in upstate New York, in Albany, this is kind of what happened, is the judges say, we're not going to renew this guy, John Sarcone. And then just yesterday or the day before, Pam Bondi said, okay, well, I'm just going to name him the assistant to himself. And he says, keep going. So this is obviously going to be litigated, and it's obviously going to go up to the Supreme Court. Can you appoint a second interim? Yeah. I mean, that's sort of what happened in New Jersey, where the judges said, well, we're going to appoint this other woman as an interim. But then Pam Bondi fired her.
Right. She didn't last a day.
She didn't last a day. Didn't last a minute. And, it seems like the attorney general should have the power to fire an attorney who works for her.
Well, and also because Alina Habba's term of 120 days ends this Friday.
Right.
So they installed the new person before her term actually ended.
Right. And of course, it's worth saying, 15 of the 17 federal judges in New Jersey were appointed by Democrats.
Right.
So there is a partisan sheen to this. And of course, Alina Habba's, for sort of most noteworthy prosecutions were of Ras Baraka, the mayor of Newark. Those charges were dropped. But then LaRonda McIver for, a protest outside the ICE facility. So it's a fascinating kind of weird situation. And, it's a function of not pursuing Senate confirmation for these people, but doing it in an ad hoc way. And it wouldn't be shock me if it went up to the Supreme Court. I mean, Pam Bondi said this is an Article 2 constitutional issue, and Article 2 is the part of the Constitution that lays out the powers of the presidency.
So as of today is Thursday, Alina Habba is still technically the interim or is she not? And then what happens until it goes to the Supreme Court? Does the state of New Jersey not have?
Yeah. I think she's until tomorrow is still in power. It's not clear what happens next. Will they put somebody else up? Or I don't know. I mean, it's a really crazy situation.
How many of these U.S. attorneys general have not yet been confirmed across the country?
Yeah, it's a bunch. Remember the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, Danielle Sassoon, resigned. She was interim. Her replacement, Jay Clayton, is interim. He probably, Trump intends to pursue Senate confirmation, but hasn't yet. So I think I read somewhere that in Trump's first term, all 85 were confirmed by the Senate. Because remember, you can have more than one in a state, more than one district. And I think it's so far just been like a quarter of that. So it's a function of kind of, I don't know whether it's congressional dysfunction or, the president wanting to kind of shortcut and put these people in and get them to work right away.
So it's atypical of prior administrations. We usually
wouldn't have this many interim people. You might have an interim just if someone resigns or whatever, but this is sort of unusual, and it could break new boundaries of law. And the Supreme Court has shown itself to be very solicitous to executive authority, and they might say, this law. So when you challenge a law like this, right, you might say, well, okay, Ari, but this is the law, so they can do it. But if you can you can do what's called a facial challenge to a law, and a facial challenge means you just say it's unconstitutional. It's not as applied. Mm-hmm. It's not that it was misapplied or misunderstood. It's just like Congress wrote an unconstitutional law, and that could be brought to the Supreme Court.
Okay. Okay, so we won't know what's going to happen, but I think the implications of a win for the Trump administration in the Supreme Court will be what? What would not happen going forward that happened here?
I mean, I think there would have to be another sort of procedure for, what happens after 120 days with these interim people. Can the president extend indefinitely?
Why was she not confirmed by the Senate? How many votes does she need to be confirmed by the Senate?
She wasn't brought.
Yeah. Well,
it's a simple majority.
It's a simple majority. Yeah. Okay. So that's a Republican problem, right? They could have brought it and they didn't.
Right. And one example here is Ed Martin, who was the acting U.S. attorney for D.C., and they felt they didn't have the votes, and so they didn't bring him, and instead they put him in the pardon office. No, actually, he's very important. He's running the weaponization group, all this stuff, but it's not a confirmation role. Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, the other part is maybe Habba doesn't want to do it on a permanent basis. Right.
But she said after this, in the press conference, she said, I'm staying. They're not going to make me go anywhere.
Yeah. Right. And the other question is sort of one of enforcement. I mean, what if the president just says, no, she's staying? What happens?
Right. What does happen? The DOJ would have to get involved and they wouldn't take her out. So
of course. Yeah. So it's a strange thing. I mean, I think it's not unheard of for a court to exercise some supervision over prosecutors, or they can appoint a, but still it's a strange check on the president's power, right? Because the president says, I want this person in an executive agency, and the judges have to veto it. It's a strange law, and I wouldn't be surprised if it comes under some fire on appeal.
Yeah. Okay. Sunlight time.
Great.
Mine has to do with, we talked last week about Chinese purchases of large swaths of land in strategic locations across the country. So I'm staying on the Chinese theme. This week, a story came out that Microsoft, run by Bill Gates, has had a program called the Digital Escorts program in place since 2015, in which Chinese tech support were basically let into sort of sensitive back-end sites, and one of them was the Department of Defense's platform, and so a lot of sort of went viral, and I think it was Laura Loomer who
like
exposed it.
Digital escort.
Digital escort. I know. I looked up what exactly they did because I was curious. It's not what you think. But basically, the idea that our adversaries in the world are given technological access to our Department of Defense for how long now, right? 8 years, 10 years, is an extraordinary, generously defined, act of negligence at best. How could that have happened? Who thought that was a good idea? Microsoft says that there were no security breaches and they've ended the program. But, perhaps it's just corporate greed, right? It's easier and cheaper to have guys from China get on the phone with your escorts and work their way through these systems and try to get into the code. But, you could install malware. You could do all kinds of things, spy. Sure. It seemed obvious that it was a bad idea, but, never underestimate the power of corporate greed. And just this week, J.D. Vance was talking to the All In podcast guys, and was talking about how Microsoft fired 9,000 employees, but still is applying for all the H-1B visas to have workers from foreign countries. So, that clearly is something that they are focused on, which is, getting cheap labor, basically. Yeah. And in this case, it was just, an act of terrible negligence, maybe even just bold irresponsibility. Some people are suggesting, tinfoil hat guys are suggesting it was deeper than that, but I won't go there. I'm just going to say it's bad enough to be Bill Gates and to not have thought of this and to allow it to have gone on. And it's hard to believe that it hasn't done some damage to American interests.
Great. My spotlight is a little sunnier maybe, and that is...
It always is.
I try. The extraordinary performance of the Israeli stock market in the wake of the war. Tel Aviv Stock Exchange is the fastest growing in the world. There's some reporting in the FT about this sort of enormous success, resilience of the Israeli economy. And I just think it's just an amazing story that in the face of unbelievable opposition and anti-Semitism, people, when the money is down, are continuing to bet on Israel and continuing to believe in Israel's human capital, its ingenuity, its creativity. News has recently been circulating and confirmed that Romania just bought Israel's Iron Dome for almost $2.5 billion. So a sign of the indispensability of the Jewish state, but and you don't want to read too much into dollars and cents, but it's hard not to read it as really a bet on Israel's future at a time when obviously there's a lot to worry about. I will say, on that worrying front, a story I don't think has gotten enough attention was the arrest of 2 Israelis. And I think in Belgium, and for the crime of having served, they're doing their mandatory military service. Yeah. And this idea of tiny Israel becoming more and more unwelcome around the world is something that worries me.
The shipload that wasn't allowed to.
I was just going to say, in Greece, and so. The kind of ugly echoes of a Europe that makes itself unwelcoming. Remember the sort of pogrom in Amsterdam last year. And so these are trends to watch. And, like everything, the glass is always half empty and half full. So on the one hand, the miracle of Israel and the miracle of Israeli resilience and Israeli creativity and will to live. On the other hand, it seems like encroaching darkness in Europe and elsewhere, and intolerance towards Israelis.
You know that I love to talk about the fall of Western Europe and these, what happened in Greece, what happened in Belgium, what happened,
just like real mob.
Plane load of kids from a summer camp.
Yeah, in Valencia.
They're all pointing that direction. And interestingly, in other parts of Europe, there are signs of hope, Poland and Hungary and places I wouldn't have expected.
Purchase,
Romania purchase. Yeah. So, Yeah, we'll have a new Europe soon, I guess, in a different part. Okay, sunburn time.
Yeah.
Mine is, I don't know if you remember, but on July 10th, I remember where I was when I read that that the FDA had approved Moderna's COVID vaccine for children ages 6 months to 11 years and for pregnant women. And all of my friends who are RFK Jr. fan girls were texting each other saying, what? How did this happen? And nobody understood how that could possibly be. Just yesterday, the HHS Secretary RFK Jr. and NIH Director Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and the FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary just delivered remarks saying, nope, that's not going to happen. It's no longer on the schedule for pregnant women specifically and for children ages 6 months to 11 years because there's never been any data proving that they needed it. And there have been some reports that have come out indicating that they've been very damaging to particularly pregnant women and their unborn children. So they've canceled that. But the sunburn here is actually that the FDA approved this while RFK Jr. was on vacation. He said he didn't know about it. It was never passed by his desk. He didn't approve of the approval. And he fired chief of staff and I think the deputy chief of staff for doing that. And I think it's just further evidence that our government sometimes doesn't work to serve those who are elected, who represent the will of the people. They serve their own interests. And this was such an obvious and blatant way of doing that. I always find it fascinating, back to the beginning, right, with our discussion about the Tulsi Gabbard revelations. I always find it interesting that when people behave this way, that they write it down, they leave a paper trail, they don't bleach bit it like Hillary Clinton tried to do. If you're gonna behave in these illegal and immoral and unethical ways, the least you could do is cover your tracks well.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Mine is going to be, I guess, sunburn is all the sort of the elements of Columbia who drove the school to this impasse, and now hopefully are thinking about the errors of their ways. I have to say, there's a lot of skepticism, and we've had sort of really, I think, productive disagreements about sort of the role of government here. But reading through the settlement that Columbia agreed to with the administration, I'm pretty pleasantly surprised. I think it seems fair. It seems reasonable. The deal is, $200 million goes to Washington in exchange. Holds and blocks on lots of federal funding are lifted, and that's far more than $200 million. And it seems to me the reforms are common sense, adopting a reasonable definition of anti-Semitism, adopting reasonable restrictions on protests, and moving discipline away from the faculty who are crazy.
They're in need of discipline.
They're in need of discipline towards, central administration. At least maybe there's some accountability there. And an independent monitor who will report back. And these all seem to me...
The unmasking, did you say that?
Unmasking.
Very important.
Important. And these all seem to me what a school should do if it acknowledges it has a problem. Just like a person. If you have a problem, if you haven't, whether it's an addiction or anything, or you just want to be better, you take certain concrete steps. And it seems to me this is exactly what Columbia has now been forced to do and by the administration. And I hope it results in a less insane campus. Lots of the students who occupied buildings and smashed things have been expelled or suspended. And I hope the school can get back to learning and doing what it should be doing. I'm no cheerleader for this president, but I have to say, people said there's nothing to be done about these campuses, not that you can't control them. There's a little uts, and I think hopefully it's a better place and a better school for all students, not just for Jewish students. And also, I should say, I hope Harvard is taking notes here. Now, I think their case in court is pretty strong. But as Columbia said, yeah, we could have won in court, but ultimately, the money involved and the ability of the government to exert pressure is significant, and it was better to reach an agreement and reach a deal.
Yeah. I guess I'm a little more skeptical, though, just in terms of the long-term effects of this. It's clearly a win in the short term, and for the next 3 years, while President Trump is still the president, anybody on Columbia campus will benefit from this. But what happens after that?
And you do what you can do. I mean,
right. I'm not saying it's not a win. I'm just saying I wouldn't send my children to Columbia hoping that there's some deep, meaningful change, or that people there really did this because they wanted to be better. As you said.
No, they did it because the hammer was over their head.
And so that's not an indicator of cultural change. That's just expediency, and I'm worried that we're going to mistake this as some meaningful shift.
No, I think that's why a sort of monitor is important. And I think obviously it's like, don't even trust, but verify. But things like empowering more campus security to make arrests. Mm-hmm. Good thing, I think.
They're all
reasonable
good things.
They're all good things. So, the devil be in the details. Obviously, back to school is in, a month and a half or whatever it is. And so, hoping it's a better year than the last 2 years have been. And I also just want to say, there were a lot of accusations that, this was the pressure on universities was it wasn't really about anti-Semitism. It was about other things. And I don't know, you read through this settlement, it really was about anti-Semitism. Now, I'm not saying there were other interests or whatever, but, I think in Jewish history, it's really rare to have government acting on behalf of the Jews. It's hard to even think of maybe 10 times it's happened. And so, I'm not saying be grateful, but it's a pretty impressive thing. And I hope it works out. And there are downsides for sure. But you want the biggest kid in the schoolyard to be on your side.
I agree. And can I just emphasize the point you made?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is going on too long, but you're right to say it will benefit not just the Jews, but it will benefit all students on campus, including, all the other groups that have been assaulted by this sort of worldview that created the anti-Semitism.
anti-DEI
That's what
policy
mean.
here, which is really substantive.
DEI
hopefully.
really allowed for the blooming of this kind of anti-Semitism on these campuses, and it has affected female athletes, it's affected white Christian males, it's affected Asian students, affected anybody who has a right of center point of view. And so all of those people will benefit from the dismantling of that ideology if it expresses itself as, the enforcement of anti-Semitic behavior, then great, everybody wins.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, Ari.